Being scared. There's nothing quite like it really, and it's something that you will experience very soon indeed. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was a new nurse at our hospital and had only been working there for a couple of months. I had brought a patient of mine up from day surgery from the ER for an endoscopy, and they called me back down and asked me to bring up her family, as she didn't speak enough English to communicate and we needed her consent for a procedure. After dropping them off, I walked past the waiting room and headed back down the hall to the elevators. I took the way back to get to the ER, and all the hallways were deserted. You see, this used to be the pediatric wing of the hospital, but it has been shut down for years, and all the rooms are deserted, full of broken equipment, beds, and just general crap. As I reached the nurses' station at the T-junction, between the pediatric hallway and the hallway that goes down to the elevators, I saw a little girl standing across from the nurses' station further down the hall. She had big pigtails and was wearing a brown dress and white shoes, holding a teddy bear. I thought perhaps she was a family member who had walked away from the day surgery waiting room. I was concerned that she would go into one of these rooms and might get hurt or lost. So I said, "Hey little girl, what are you doing? You don't need to be over here. You're going to get hurt." And I walked around the nurse's station so that I could grab her hand and bring her back. I shit you not. As I got about 15 feet away from her, she vanished. Every hair on my body stood up straight, and I turned and ran like a bat out of hell to the elevator. I pounded that button for what seemed like an eternity, until the elevator got to the floor I was on. As I got back to the ER, I walked up to the nurse's desk, and one of the older nurses looked at me and said, "Geez, what's wrong with you?" I remember babbling like an idiot as I tried to tell them what happened. After listening to me for a moment or two, the nurse said, "Oh, you saw the little ghost girl? Yeah, she's been around here for years." And I remember replying, "Well, thanks for telling me about this before." Apparently the ghost has been here ever since the ER, ducking in and out of patients' rooms and peeking around curtains. My wife worked up on the 7th floor and said that one time on nights, a whole row of patients started yelling about a little girl that was running around in the rooms. I guess she gets around. This all took place in November of last year. I booked an entire trip in order to propose to my then girlfriend, flew us both out to Florida to go to Disney World, and the last concert of one of our favourite bands, Amberlin, and of course propose. I proposed in the Disney castle, and she said yes. Everything went well. We then took off next morning, Thanksgiving Day. On the way home, we connected through San Francisco. About 30 minutes into the flight, the captain comes on the intercom and announces that one of the engines wasn't depressurizing properly. We do a loop back to the airport, get unloaded into the terminal as we wait for another plane to be readied. When we got to the terminal, my now fiancée switched on her phone back from airplane mode, and within a minute, she had 10 plus voicemails from the same number, which she didn't know. Fearing the worst, we called the number without listening to any voicemails. I knew something was wrong as soon as she started to talk to them. Her face went blank, and she didn't say a word. I told her to give me the phone as she did. I asked who it was, and the voice I heard back just sounded dead. Absolutely no hint of emotion to it. All he said was, "I will kill you both as soon as you land in Seattle." I asked who he was again, and he just hung up. She said she had no idea who it was, and I certainly didn't know the voice. I called him back and he would answer, and he just repeated the time that we were landing. Little did he know that we were delayed. I used to work in telecom, and I pulled some strings to get a name and address for the phone number. Neither of us knew the name nor the address. She looked him up on Facebook, and she had one mutual friend with him, her ex-best friend. We will call her Karen. She was no longer friends with her, as they got wrapped up in heavy drug use and stole from my fiancé. We did a little more digging, and found out that he was the boyfriend of Karen's new best friend. My theory is that Karen saw all the posts that my fiancé was posting on social media about the trip and the engagement, and when she saw the great time that we were having, she was pissed, and wanted to piss on our parade. I didn't take it as a joke, however. A death threat is a death threat, and in my mind, as meth heads, they could follow through on a whim. I called him and talked over his ramblings. I told him that I was armed, I knew where he lived, and was not afraid to take action in my own hands. He hung up on me, so I called the Seattle area law enforcement, and they told me to call back on a non-holiday. So I called the emergency line, and they reiterated the same statement. We were on our own. We ended up flying in close to 9 hours after the original arrival time. Once we landed, we both had a single voicemail. Hers I assume from the guy, and mine, I had no idea, as he hadn't been calling my phone. My voicemail was from my dad, who said he'd gotten a call from my neighbour saying that the mailbox had been destroyed. Looked like it had been hit by a car, and that the mail was stolen from it. Her voicemail, however, was the guy screaming, "Where are you? How dare you?" and plenty of other threats and random yelling. I drove home and dropped off my fiancée at her house, insisting she not come with me to my place, in case someone was still there. They threw a brick through my window with an old picture of my fiancée and Karen attached to it. I tried calling him, to no answer. I went to bed and covered up the window with a tarp, making sure my fiancée was okay. I filed a police report the next day and said I couldn't do anything without seeing them on my property. We blocked everyone involved on social media and went about our lives. I didn't hear from them for about 3 weeks, and then he sent me a picture of my fiancée working. I immediately called her and told her to go to the back of her work, a bubble tea shop. I then called mall security and explained the situation, but by the time they got to the food court where the picture was taken, he was obviously gone. At this point I was done messing around. I knew his address and swung by and dropped off a note attached to a critical defense .4 bullet, saying, "This is your last chance to leave her alone. This is your only warning." It's been almost 9 months now, and I haven't heard a word or seen them again. But for both our sakes, I sincerely hope not to meet you, Tyler. I'm a 20-year-old female from the UK. I moved to a university around 6 hours away from my home. I was so scared and excited about the concept of moving, but also worried since my parents were majorly overprotective, which is understandable as the eldest child and only daughter. Fast forward 3 months into my first year, and I'm walking to a nightclub with my friends, which was really fun up until the bouncers told me I had to take 15 minutes. My friends, being as great as per usual, decided to go and wait with me, as we sat on the benches next to the club. As I was sat waiting and smiling away at the bouncers, a middle-aged man came and sat next to me, uncomfortably close. My thoughts told me that something wasn't right. I made a gesture to the male bouncer, who was watching him, and made him aware of my discomfort. Whilst doing this, the guy had started to speak to me in a thick foreign accent, which I guessed was more Eastern European. He grabbed out his phone and held it up and asked for my number. I declined and told him that I was okay, to which he started to move closer. He then started loading up his camera and asked to take a picture of me. Before he could press anything, I covered my face and moved so that it was blurred. "Don't take a picture of me," I shouted, and moved away as quickly as I could. Alarm bells were ringing like crazy, and I started to panic. The bouncer had clicked on and came over and grabbed the guy's phone. The next part still creeps me out. Looking through his phone, the bouncer saw a lot of pictures of different girls, and I'm not really sure of their condition, as he turned away in disgust. Then a text came through, and the bouncer stared down at the man. It was in this moment that the creep got up and ran as fast as he could. The bouncer tried to chase this guy and tackle him to the ground, but failed. However, he shouted to his work colleagues to phone the police and to do so quickly. They handed over the phone, and I had to give a statement to the police. He was part of a human trafficking ring, and I think I was about to be his next target. So creepy guy who wanted to take my picture, please, let's never meet again. This is a story that I'm not supposed to be telling. A family secret that I'm not supposed to know about. When my grandfather was younger, he became the principal of an elementary school. He was in his late 20s, early 30s at the time. And despite being young, he was a born leader. He was a great principal, and everyone loved him. I can attest to that, as I attended multiple award ceremonies for him, and the respect and admiration he received was crazy. There was a young boy at the school who was having behavioural issues in class, and my grandfather saw the kid didn't have a lot of parental support. So he called the father and had a talk with him about spending more time with his son and just a general parenting session. It turned out that all the boy needed was his dad's attention, and after a few weeks, he was happy and was a model student. Whenever my grandfather would leave school late, he would see the dad was playing basketball with his son after he got home from work. It was one of those moments that he took pride in, being able to make a difference in people's lives. However, not everything had such an easy solution, and my grandfather found himself having to deal with an employee, Stanley the janitor, who was showing up for work drunk. Stanley was an alcoholic with a mean streak, and my grandfather tried on multiple occasions to deal with his behaviour. Finally though, Stanley one day showed up so drunk that my grandfather sent him home and called the superintendent to let him know that he was going to fire him the next morning after he sobered up. He then warned them to let him deal with Stanley when he was sober, because he was not a stable person. As it goes in these kind of stories, the superintendent was furious and decided that he was going to call Stanley himself and fire him, despite my grandfather's warning. No one called my grandfather to tell him about it either, so he was completely in the dark and thought that he would just deal with it in the morning. Stanley was furious and went to the school that evening. He searched the offices, my grandfather's included, and tore things apart until finally he had what he wanted. He was in a blaze of fury, and on his way out, he saw the father and son playing basketball. He walked towards them and pulled something out of his trousers. It was a gun. He then proceeded to shoot the little boy, killing him instantly. The father was so upset and was crying hysterically. But somehow, he managed to get the gun away from Stanley and shot him. My grandfather was called to the elementary school immediately by police because there were 2 dead bodies, the little boy's and Stanley's. But what was even worse was the crying from the father and him saying that he couldn't save his son. It was clear that he would never forgive himself for that day. My grandfather was pulled aside by one of the police who had searched Stanley for evidence. They had found a hit list of people that he was going to kill and all the addresses of the people that he had received when he was searching the offices. My grandfather was number 1 on that list. So if it wasn't for that father, it's likely that I would have never been able to meet my grandfather, and possibly my mother and grandmother would have been killed if Stanley had been able to complete his mission. To this day, I get goosebumps whenever I hear that story, and it's just so chilling. My grandfather never uttered a single word about this after his initial recount to my mother, and she made me swear to never tell him that I knew. He carried the weight of that boy's death until the day he died. So Stanley, I'm glad we never had to meet and that you were stopped before you could cause more harm. This happened a few weeks ago. I'm married, but my husband is often out of town, and I am usually home alone. My front door opens into my living room, which has big windows, but thick curtains so no outsider could possibly peep in. My front door also has a small window near the top of it. I don't really worry about that little window, because someone would have to be at least 7 to 8 feet tall to peer through it. However, it would provide some direct line of sight into my bedroom, which I often use to change with the bedroom door open. Because who the hell could see me? There's also a motion sensor light right on my porch that goes off whenever a car drives past or someone's in the vicinity. A few weeks ago I was alone at night, and the light kept going off, but I ignored it. I figured it was the neighbor's cat again. When I got up to leave next morning, my front doorway was blocked by one of those heavy metal chairs that we got for our front porch. I moved it back. This happened 3 times whilst my husband was gone, and it started freaking me out a little bit. I was perplexed, but not really worried about it until I thought about it later. Wind certainly didn't somehow move it. Then it hit me. The chair was moved right under the door window. I then put several heavy flower pots on chairs, just in case they were magically scooting themselves over during the night from wind or whatever. The next morning, one was blocking the door again, and the heavy ceramic pot was placed neatly on the patio table. My husband thinks I'm crazy. I'm not even sure how this would be considered weighty enough to report. However, I change with my bedroom door closed now, and have dusted off the good old shotgun. He's gone again next week, so here I am home alone, just praying that I'm not the target of someone whom I'd rather not meet. My friend and I planned a day to go to Disneyland. It was originally going to be 4 of us, but my friend who was driving wanted someone else to tag along. The girl that was coming was the 16-year-old daughter of some lady that went to my friend's church, and during this time I am 18. We pick her up at our house, and she's a kind of small petite girl, and she just sits in the back of the car, in between me and our other friend. I notice almost instantly that she is very timid and soft-spoken. I thought she might be shy, and right away she starts talking to me. Just me. even though she knew everyone else in the car. This is the second time I met her. The first time I was at my friend's graduation party a month before, but I only said a few words to her at the time. The first thing this girl says to me is that she has cancer. I got really sad and thought maybe this is why she looked kind of frail. She went on about how she's staying in a local hospital half the time and her doctors are really nice. I didn't even ask what type of cancer she had. I was just concerned about making that day fun for her. But then she started talking about how her uncle raped her. By then, I'm thinking this girl has gone through a lot. But I was wondering why she was telling me all of this when she doesn't even know me. We get to Disneyland and we wait in line for the first ride. She starts telling us that the chemo and radiation is kicking in. I see her walk behind a tree and stick her finger in her mouth and force herself to throw up. By now I'm thinking that something's up, and I ask my friends some questions. They tell me that she is a pathological liar. Okay, that would have been nice to tell me beforehand. Throughout the day, the girl was constantly trying to sit next to me on every ride that we went on, talking about her cancer and how she wants me to be there for her. She even pointed out a random stranger in the crowd and said that that was her uncle, and she hugged me to protect herself. A few hours later, she did the exact same thing and points to a completely different guy. We use the rest stop, and when I'm done I realize everyone else is still in the restroom except for her. She starts telling me that ever since the first time she met me, she knew that I was the one. She said that she felt this special connection to me and that I was her knight in shining armor. It really freaked me out. Later on, my friends tell me that the girl actually has a boyfriend. I couldn't believe it, but sure enough, I go on Facebook and see pictures of them together, and it says that she's in a relationship. What? Why is this girl saying all of these things to me while she has a boyfriend? I was getting quite creeped out by this point, and I wanted to leave. But more than anything, I wanted to catch her in her lie. I asked her why she still has hair if she's supposedly been going through all this chemo and radiation. She turns around, and I shit you not, she pulls out a chunk of her hair from her scalp and says, "See, I'm losing hair as we speak." This girl has issues. I ask her why she's flirting with me if she has a boyfriend, and told her that she was wrong. She immediately said that she was going to break up with him, and handed me the ring he gave her and told me to have it. On the way home, she opened my hand and handed me a thumbtack. I was thinking, what the hell? She said she wanted me to keep it because this is from her, and that's the thumbtack that she uses to cut herself with. I did not want to be holding that thing. I just wanted to finally be home. On a side note, during the day we were talking about the colleges that we were going to in the fall, and I mentioned the one that I was going to go to. This girl said that she would be going there when she goes to college. I thought she was lying again, but I found out from my friend that her dad works at the college and that she gets free tuition there. So that happened to be true, but of course everything else was a lie. 2 years later, I saw her at the school walking to class and tried to avoid her as much as I could. I did not want to go through all of that again. At the time, my father worked around the UK, and he had a business meeting in Manchester on a Friday. My parents decided to make a weekend of it and do some shopping and go for a nice dinner. Especially now that all the kids were grown up, why not? They booked into their hotel on Thursday night, ready for Dad's meeting on Friday morning. They arrived to a beautiful hotel, which had shops just below their room. So they both showered and went to bed. It was late by the time they got there. Friday morning rolls around, and my father goes to his meeting. My mother knew that he wouldn't be long, so she decided to have a lie-in and wait until he'd left in order for herself to get ready so that they could then go shopping and have a nice dinner. She hopped into the shower, and of course, the bathroom steamed up. Drying herself off, something made her look into the mirror, and written in perfect letters in a perfect line, not streaking or anything that you'd expect writing to do in a mirror, was the word murder. My mother laughed it off, even though she was a little nervous about it. Just to remind you, my mother hadn't left that room since Thursday night. It was now Friday afternoon, and room services hadn't been in, as my mother was still in there and purposefully left the Do Not Disturb sign on the door. They also both had a shower yesterday, and were adamant that it was not there before they left. She finished getting ready, and my dad came back from his meeting. My mother steamed up the room to show my father the writing on the mirror, and there it was, still there with no streaks on it, still perfect. But as they usually do, they brushed it off, assumed that someone must have done it as a joke, and the cleaners had not wiped the mirror. But thinking back, they said it was too perfect on that mirror, like it had just been written that day, not to mention the fact that it wasn't there yesterday. They carried on going out and doing some shopping, sightseeing, had dinner, then headed back to their room, falling asleep on the bed still in their clothes. Around midnight though, they both wake up, wide awake and couldn't get back to sleep. They decided to come home, might as well. They'd seen everything, they'd done everything they'd needed to, and by the time they checked out and come home it was about 5 AM already. Secretly, my mother admitted that she was relieved, as the more she thought about the mirror, the more upset it made her. One of my mother's sisters called her that afternoon asking which hotel she was staying at in Manchester. My mother told her. Her sister, now sounding very upset and worried, had to inform her that there was a murder in the hotel last night. They said that it happened around 2 AM, but they did not find the bodies until 6 AM in the morning. 2 men had been in a scuffle with another 2 men, and they were pushed out of the window. My folks soon found out that this happened on the room above theirs. My mum and dad would have woken up to the noise, and worse, 2 dead bodies on top of the shopping building below theirs. Something was definitely watching out for them that weekend. When I was 20, I used to work as a pizza delivery guy in a small town in northern Germany. On my way home, I had to drive a few miles on a remote road that led through forest and farmland. One night around about 1 AM after I'd finished my shift, there was a huge thunderstorm, and I had to drive really slowly and carefully. I was approaching a junction in the road, and I noticed a figure standing in the middle. It looked like a tall and slender man in a long black leather coat with a hood. At first I thought it was someone who had had an accident, and thought that they were looking for help, but when my headlights hit the figure, I noticed that the cloak, especially the hood, appeared to be empty. My headlights did not illuminate the cloak like they should have. It was just the lighting reflecting off the smooth, wet surface that allowed me to see the shape. Of course, I floored the gas pedal and went as fast as I could. A couple of miles later, I ran into the same, or at least a very similar figure. Again, standing right in the middle of the road, not moving at all. This time I didn't even slow down and just raced past it. I was nearly scared to death. A few weeks later, again, coming back from a shift, there was no thunderstorm and it was a beautifully warm summer night. I encountered another creature right where I saw the black figure before. It looked like a giant deer, but without any fur and pale greyish white skin. It was extremely skinny, almost skeletal-like, and had an abnormally long and thin tail. It ran alongside the road and kept pace with me very easily as I drove past it. I looked across and then slammed on the gas pedal and went suicidally fast as it started to fall behind. I was so freaked out. I quit my job the very next day, just so that I didn't have to use that road ever again. I am originally from a state that is predominantly hot all year round, and I'm not a big fan of warmer weather. So when winter comes, I like to have my windows open and spend as much time outside as possible. It was one of those chilly winter nights. I was around 10 years old and the only people home were my two nannies and me. They were on the other side of the house watching TV as I was in my room. It was getting late, and likely around about 10 PM. So I decided to take a shower and hop into bed. Everything's fine. I hop out of the shower and get ready for bed. At this point I should quickly go over the layout of my room. It's rectangular and has two windows facing the front door entrance to my house. From my windows, you can see a walkway to the front door, and the path is sort of a gated in brick. Basically, you'd have to enter the driveway, turn left, and walk down a path that leads to my front door. A bed faces one of those windows, and I can see all the way down the path. Both windows have a mesh on the screen. This is where things get crazy. Like I mentioned before, I had the windows facing my bed open to let the cold air in. My room was so well lit that it's hard to see anything through the window. However, as soon as I turned off the light, I could see the figure of a man with his face pressed upon the screen. In that moment I felt his piercing gaze. He was motionless and smiling. He had facial hair that looked as if his whole face were covered in fur. I briefly thought I was imagining this and was seeing something that wasn't there because of all the foliage outside my window. I had taken a couple of quick steps towards the window to get a look before I confirmed what I saw was real. This all happened in a matter of 10 seconds. I bolted out my room and towards my nanny's room. The hallways in my house are long and narrow with large windows that face the entrance. I didn't dare look out. I reached the room which my nannies resided in to tell them what happened, and they just laughed. To be quite honest, I was the boy who cried wolf. I was always a prankster and a bit imaginative, so it could be hard to take me seriously when I was younger. I had to beg them to come and check with me, and from what I can remember they took it seriously. We get to my room, and of course no one's there. My window screen is left untouched, and the man is gone. I don't think they were totally convinced, and neither were my parents. I couldn't sleep in my room for days though because of the incident. My house didn't even have an alarm system, so there was nothing stopping this person from coming back. I'm still very disappointed in how things were handled, and had no power over anything. I have no idea how long that guy was out there for, and if he was watching me undress or dress myself after. I remember how messed up his smile was. It was menacing. I'm glad I wasn't harmed by this guy, and I really hope it was his only visit. I stopped opening my windows at night, and I missed the cool winter air. So creepy guy with your face pressed against my window screen? Let's never meet. I am currently a 14-year-old girl who was born and grew up in Hawaii, but I look more Hispanic than Hawaiian. I also have a horrible slur that sounds like I can hardly pronounce words. At the time I was around 8 and had reddish blonde hair which was horribly dyed and very unkempt. There were 5 of us on this trip. Me, my mother, Tawny, Travis, and my sister's boyfriend Jay. The actual story. When I went to California, my mum decided that we should go to a nearby swap meet in Orange County after we'd been to Disneyland. So at around 12 when we left Disneyland and took a creeper van to the place, it was not what I expected. It was a plain white building with some people lingering outside. And this is where I first saw him. He was a Hispanic male, fairly white skin tones, with black baggy pants and a white t-shirt that had stains everywhere. It looked as if it hadn't been washed in weeks. I paid no attention, as I was too busy fussing over the newly painted unicorn on my face. We left the car, and I was told to stay by my mother. Throughout the day, I kept seeing him. He got very close twice, and was in grabbing distance from me, when I suddenly noticed him scurry away. I noticed that he kept whispering to his friend, dressed identically to him in Spanish. Travis is the only one of us that could speak broken Spanish. When we went to dinner, it was almost 5 p.m. He and his friend sat at the table parallel to us, and stared at us the whole time. As we were making our way out, my mum decided to make a sudden stop at this booth that was one of the largest. One side was clothing, and the others was toys and such. My mum let me go to look at the Pokemon cards that were on display about 10 feet away. From where I was standing, I could see her at the entrance into the store, but she could barely see me, and couldn't see the door either. Whilst I'm looking around, the creeper enters. He quickly walks into the aisle that I'm in, and starts speaking to me in Spanish. I was always a socially awkward child, so I quickly replied, "I don't speak Spanish." He went to grab my arm, and forced me away from the aisle of Pokemon cards. My mother always taught me to toss myself on the ground and scream and cry if anyone grabbed me, so that's exactly what I did. Travis came whipping around the corner and faced the man, and Jay blocked the exit. The creeper laughed and told Travis in Spanish something along the lines of, "This is my daughter. She's just throwing a fit, don't worry." Knowing what he said, Travis flipped his shit and grabbed the guy by the collar, and in clear English, "That's my sister," and shoved him into the rack and punched him. Jay quickly picked me up and ran out of the store, leaving the creeper in the store with a lot to think about. The next day, Jay and Travis returned because my Pokemon game wasn't working. We bought it about 3 minutes after entering the shop when nothing had happened, and I overheard him telling my mum the guy was standing out front of the swapper meet with a broken nose, and apparently flashed a gun at them as they were driving away. I attended a family reunion recently and saw a distant cousin of mine who was in his early to mid-20s, and he told me a story about an experience that he had during his 3rd year of high school. Let's call my cousin Francis. Francis was about 5'4" and thin for a 17-year-old at the time. He was also very prone to injuries, especially broken bones. Apparently, during his 3rd year of high school, the school he attended just hired more janitors, and according to my cousin, all of them were okay, except this particular one. The janitor was in his mid-50s, clean hair and teeth, but according to my cousin, there was something off about him. The guy would always carry a cross or some sage with him whenever he cleaned up classrooms, and would tell the student things like, "God bless you." He would always mumble biblical quotes underneath his breath. At first, a lot of the students didn't mind him. Francis said that many respected him even though he did these things. One day, however, everything changed. My cousin and his 3 friends stayed behind after school one day to finish up a big project. The room was unlocked, but the teacher in charge left. But before she did, she told them to have that specific janitor lock the door for them when they were done. So my cousin and his friends continued their group project until at one point, the janitor came in. What my cousin remembered, he said, was that the janitor was in prayer pose and had his eyes closed. When he finished that, he watched them as they were working, and after about 10 to 15 minutes of staring at them, he offered to lead a religious sermon. My cousin said no, because they had a project to finish. Apparently he didn't hear the no, and decided to begin his sermon by saying that Francis and all of his friends were going to hell, because they did not want to hear the word of God. The group was already frustrated because the project was worth 25% of their grade, so they politely told him to leave. The janitor, of course, became enraged and just lost it. He ran towards my cousin and punched him in the face, knocking him down onto the ground. Apparently the janitor was strong as hell as well, and placed all of his weight on top of Francis. His friends were trying to pry the janitor off him because he had his hands around Francis's throat. As he's choking the life out of my cousin, he's yelling, "You devil, you will burn in hell for eternity." Francis was wheezing and basically borderline unconscious, causing panic for his friends. But I guess someone heard him, because another janitor came in, a female, and then got a broom and beat him with it until they managed to push him off my cousin. The janitor gets pushed off and gives Francis enough time to be pulled away by his friends and carried off into the hallway. The female janitor calls for backup, and long story short, the principal gets the police and the paramedics. The janitor was screaming religious stuff as he was being carried out by the officers. It turned out that the janitor dislocated my cousin's shoulder and seriously bruised his neck and ribs. Francis stayed in the hospital for a number of days. The whole experience gave him trauma, and he had to go to therapy for a few months. So in the end, the female janitor was awarded for saving my cousin, and also, the janitor was going to serve 15 years for this and past crimes. Francis still stayed at the school and eventually graduated, still living around the same area, but he promises to never return to that school. I am a female and was 23 at the time of this incident. I was living in the house that my parents left me after they died. My father died when I was 5 years old from a stomach ulcer, and my mother passed away from womb cancer when I was 22. I am an only child, with no grandparents or any other family. And so, as you can imagine, it was pretty devastating to lose my mother, and I wasn't ready to sell her home. The way the house was situated was pretty perfect for any criminal behavior. I suppose this because, although it wasn't isolated with neighbors just a stone's throw away, it was surrounded by very tall trees at the front and backed onto a forest. On to what happened. The first odd thing that didn't seem odd at the time was that someone was ringing the doorbell a lot very early in the morning that day. At first I just ignored it, because I was still grieving and depressed. I didn't really care about the outside world at the time. The person seemed to leave after 5 or 6 rings, and I fell back to sleep. Cut to the afternoon. The doorbell rang again, and this time I couldn't ignore it, because the man outside could see me through the blurry glass door in the hallway. So I answer, and this homeless-looking man with a huge backpack on the ground starts asking me about my home. He obviously wasn't part of a company, so thinking he's an oddball trying to see how easy it is to rob my house, I politely say that I'm not interested, and I close my door. He stands there for ages, but I see him eventually leave and I brush it off. 20 minutes later though, he's back, and thank God I locked my door, because I see him walk straight up to the door and try to open it. I shout through the glass at him, and he looks shocked, and says that he knew my mother. I just ignore him and call the police straight away after checking all the doors and windows are locked. While I'm still on the phone, I hear him using what sounds like tools, and getting scared he's about to break through the door. I stand by my back door, ready to run. After about 30 seconds, I see my front door shudder and slightly open. I panic, drop the home phone, and run as fast as I can down my garden into the woods, onto the path, and run into the neighbouring street. I don't see him anywhere, so I assume he's robbing my home and that's all he wanted. Slightly relieved, I knock on a stranger's door and ask them to call the police again. The police arrive to meet me in the living room of this stranger's house, and then they take me to the police station, and I find out exactly what happened, and it was a lot creepier than what I had imagined. When the police got to my home, the man was gone, but left a host of fingerprints and evidence, and because he was known to the police, he was picked up the next day hiding in a family campsite. He wasn't too bright obviously, and had a long list of mental health problems, everything from schizophrenia to manic depression. He used a long screw-like tool to break my door lock by hammering it through, and once inside, he left huge carving knife marks all along the hallway, as well as muddy handprints and creepy carved out words on all 4 bedroom doors, which were almost all spelt incorrectly. Words like bitch, as well as the phrase, gut you. It might not sound like much, but I can't express how scary it is to see slice marks meters long covering your hallway. He also left a large knife stabbed into one of the bedroom doors, fingerprint and all. He didn't steal anything as far as I'm aware, but he'd actually left a note for me that morning when I hadn't answered my door. Although I never saw it because it was under a plant pot, his spelling was atrocious, so it was hard to even fully understand. The note just said that he knew my full name and that I lived alone. Frustratingly, I wish I could say that he went to prison for a long time, but in the end I think he only got around 3 years, even though he was wanted for other petty crimes and a more serious case of rape. I'll never see him again since I sold my old family home, but I still can't bring myself to answer the door to strangers to this day. My parents' house has always given me the heebie-jeebies, especially the stairs and the upstairs hall. 20 years ago, we had a Dalmatian called Archie. Everyone was his friend, and according to him, everyone liked to play. One night, not too late as it was a school night, we were all watching TV, and Mum was getting everything ready for us kids to go to school the next day. We heard Archie do a yap. Now he's a big dog. He doesn't yap. "What's the matter?" shouted my dad to Archie. But nothing. Archie would have come into the room, nibbled Dad's hands to follow him, and take my dad to the unexpected guest or whatever he was looking at. Going to make sure he was okay, Dad went into the hall to find Archie, play bowing and leaping as if playing with someone, but no one was there. Archie was bowing and leaping at the empty staircase, which was very, very odd. "There's no one there, you silly dog," my dad said. My dad switched on all the lights upstairs and investigated every room, knowing that all three of us kids were in the living room watching TV with my mother. Archie's head started to move, as if he was watching someone go up the stairs. My dad, now intrigued by the idea that the dog had seen something, or someone, said, "Well, where did they go? Go find them." Archie ran up the stairs past all our bedrooms and nearly went headfirst into the bathroom wall. He was chasing whoever or whatever he'd seen. He stopped and just looked at the window in the bathroom. Whoever or whatever it is had gone, and left my dad very unnerved that night. 15 years had passed and we'd all grown up, and unfortunately Archie had passed away. A year or so after Archie had passed, they decided the house was too empty without a dog, and got another dog called Lily. Bringing her home, Dad got her certificate and put it away, noticing Lily's actual date of birth. It was a year to the day of Archie's passing. And guess what? She's been seen playing, bowing and leaping, whilst looking at the stairs, at seemingly nothing. I worked at Walt Disney World for 4 years. It was a fantastic job. I was happy every day. I left because I had to continue school. This experience happened at work, and was actually one of my last shifts before I'd be leaving the company for good. I was working at the restaurant Garden Grill in the Land Pavilion at Epcot. The fun thing about this restaurant was the layout. There were 2 stories of the restaurant, and to further complete our rotation, you would complete one layer, go up or down the stairs, complete the other layer, and then go up or down the stairs again. The main goal of our set was to see every guest in the restaurant at least once, so there was only one way for our guests to go in and out, and that was down a ramp. The greatest part about working in this restaurant was the final set of the night. Usually by 9 PM the restaurant would be mostly cleared out with 3 or 4 families remaining, and we would either be done with the set in 10 minutes and get out early, or we would have time to play around in the restaurant and have fun. This is my experience. It was the last set of the night. 3 families left in the restaurant, 2 lower, 1 upper, 4 characters. 2 began up, 2 began down. I started up and greeted the family on the top section. I completed the circle and was just about to go down my set of stairs when I saw the back of a man's head, sitting just to the right of the stairs as I was about to descend. Well, I had to greet everyone in the restaurant one last time, so I came up to his table and signalled hello. He serenely, yes, serenely, turned to me and grinned widely. He didn't have a drink, a place setting, and wasn't wearing a name tag like a manager would. Instead, he grasped the menu of the restaurant in his hands and laid it down carefully on the table when I waved. "Why, hello there, Dale," he said to me. His voice was slightly raspy. He had dark, slick hair and was wearing a long-sleeve button-down shirt with a vest over it and a tie. He also had a moustache, but had an otherwise clean-shaven face. I thought it was cool that an adult male knew which chipmunk he was talking to. Usually no one knows Chip from Dale. Again I waved and extended my hand for him to shake. He gave me a firm handshake. I pointed to the menu and rubbed my stomach and held my arms out in a question mark position, asking, "Are you hungry?" It's odd because it looked like he had just been seated for dinner, but the restaurant would be closing in 15 minutes and stopped seating guests about 30 minutes ago. The man laughed and shook his head. "Oh no, nothing for me today, Dale." I nodded and glanced over the railing to see if any other families or any other characters were in my view. None were. He spoke to me again. "I'm just here to check up on things, see how things are going." I looked back at him, a little confused. I didn't react much because I started feeling strange. The man put the menu aside again and touched my arm. Through the fur, I felt static and a swift feeling of pride. Go say hi to the children down there. The restaurant is closing. Again, I nodded and gave him a salute. But before I moved to go down the stairs, I signaled to him. I pointed at my chest and put my finger to the table. I'll be back. He nodded. All right, Dale. I went down the stairs and rounded the other side of the restaurant and gave hugs and kisses to the last two families. All the other characters were already inside, done for the night. My captain, the character manager for the night, said, "Found you, Dale," took me by the arm and went to guide me back inside. I gave her the 1-second sign and ran back to the other side of the restaurant to find the man again. But no one was up there. The menu was still in the middle of the table instead of being tucked behind the napkin holder, but the chair had been pushed in. No one had walked out behind me whilst I was on the other side with the families. It's impossible. And the only other way out was through a door that leads to the kitchen and into the backstage area. But the man wasn't wearing a Disney costume, nor did he have a name tag on. I went through the backstage door and rejoined my fellow cast members upstairs. The instant I was up there, I brought up the man. I was greeted with, "What man? The dad with the kids?" Head shaking. When I went home that night, I reflected. I truly believed this was a paranormal experience. And at first, I thought I had met Walt Disney himself. However, I would have recognized him surely, and Walt never actually saw Epcot, which led me to believe I met an Imagineer, or some other sort of operator. It boggles me, because I knew something didn't feel right when I was interacting with him. He interpreted my pantomime too well, and knew the difference between Chip and Dale. Every now and then I start looking into Disney's past, looking through photos in the hopes I might recognize someone, but no luck yet. But his image is certainly burned into my memory. I always make a point now when I'm on Disney vacation to visit the land, and hang out there for a while, waiting to catch a glimpse of the man. For some reason or another, I feel like I will see him again. I deliver pizzas. I was making a delivery to a regular customer in a building that I had been to a few dozen times before. Everything was going smoothly. He buzzed me up, I gave him his order, and I left. He lives on the 4th floor, so I always take the stairs because it's quicker. The building has 2 stairwells that lead from the lobby to every floor above it, and a separate stairwell that leads you to the basement and parking garage below the lobby. So looking at the elevators, you see a hallway to your left and a hallway to your right. In both hallways, there are 2 doors that lead to the stairwell and a bunch of other doors that lead elsewhere, like the maintenance rooms. There is one door that leads the up stairwell and the other to the down stairwell. The hallway has a deep green floor and puke green walls and a cream-coloured ceiling. Now, I gave him the pizza and took the money, and I made my way to the stairwell as I always do. Then, I got hit by this weird feeling. You know the one. That's the one everyone talks about when something is about to happen. The kind where you feel the squeezing in your stomach and heat on the back of your neck. I made my way down the stairwell, and the feeling increased. I quickly ended up at the very bottom. All that separated me from the hallway leading to the lobby was the door. I felt as if I shouldn't open it, but I was so busy that I pushed the feeling aside and stepped into the hallway. The first thing I felt was confusion. The hallway was completely different to the one I was expecting. It was entirely white, spotless, as if someone had cleaned it. I remember it looked very smooth. Gone were the objects in the door, except for the 2 doors at either end of the hallway. I started walking to one of these doors, but stopped. Something inside me told me I was in a very wrong place, and for some reason, my brain translated that into, "Hey dummy, you're in the basement." So I went back through the door and started heading up the stairs when I realized that the basement was a separate entrance from the lobby. I went back down and looked back and forth. The hallway was still completely different and I saw no way to get to the lobby. At this point I got really scared, I mean really scared. And I'm not a person who gets scared over things like this, as I tend to be level-headed and calm. But I was terrified. I sprinted up the stairs to the 2nd floor and took the elevator down, exiting the lobby. I've had many more deliveries to that building and that customer, but even when I tried exploring to find it just to make sure that I wasn't insane, it was nowhere to be found. And I have never experienced such an odd thing again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I know it's been constant compilations for the last 5 days or so, and I really hope that you've enjoyed them. I think that tomorrow we'll probably have a themed video instead, which I am yet to pick from your amazing suggestions. So thank you to everyone who shared their topics in the comments section, as well as my amazing patrons. Remember that if you want to share a story, you just need to submit it as a text post on my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. And if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to not miss your daily dose of horror. Because as we know, if you don't hit like, YouTube will think the video was uninteresting. So do me a solid. Thanks guys. And if you'd like to do something truly amazing today to support the channel, you now can, via Patreon. And you can find the link in the description, as well as the links to my social media. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.